channel. I'm Dallas Green, if y'all don't already know. And today I really want to go over the topic of the NAR's settlement. I know the settlement happened way earlier in the year, but it's just now coming to terms with how it's going to affect the real estate world as of August. As of August 17th, 2024, the settlement will fully affect the real estate world, and that's why I'm choosing to talk about it now so I can bring it up as a refresher and just a reminder of everything that it's going to change and how it's going to change the real estate world. So if y'all see me looking down and reading, I have all my notes in here. But yeah, so March 15th, 2024, NAR reached an agreement on their settlement, right? So pretty much the reaching of the settlement was the end of the litigations of claims brought on behalf of home sellers related to brokers' commissions, right? So what does that mean? Pretty much what it means is a lot of home sellers got together and they're like, you know, this commission thing, I feel like we really got scammed here because we didn't really necessarily understand what was happening when we did it, and paying a 6% commission to the buyer and seller seemed a little unfair to us. Now, to anyone that has been in that process, totally understandable. I understand that. Why wouldn't a buyer pay their own agent their own money? And I believe the reason it's always been done this way is because the buyer is already buying the house. They are putting all the closing costs down. They have that earnest money deposit down. It's a whole, the buyer is spending a lot of money. So it, I guess, always been seen as like a courtesy on the seller's behalf to just go ahead and compensate the buyer's agent since they brought the buyer. So now a bunch of sellers are like, I don't think it should be that way anymore. And now it's, I'm not gonna say it fully changes that dynamic, but I mean, it definitely does, and how moving forward things will be taking place. So the settlement is basically going to affect the real estate transactions and how a lot of things will be marketed on the MLS towards buyers, agents, and things like that. So let's just jump right into it. August 17th, 2024, that is when the change is going to happen. One of the biggest changes, I believe, in the real estate game that is going to happen is, so if an agent has a house listed on the MLS and that like a regular person wants to see the house, pretty much you cannot show a person a house without being in a buyer's agreement, a written buyer's agreement with this person. And now you can't just have 500 buyer's agreements with 500 different agents. When you enter this relationship with that person, it is now you're together, you guys go together. And this is for pretty much, you're going into this buyer's written agreement to pretty much negotiate how much you're going to get paid. So it has to be written in the contract, a specific disclosed amount or rate of compensation the real estate agent will receive, or how this amount will be determined. So whether it be 3%, whether it be hourly, a flat fee, just like X amount of dollars, that's how it's going to be determined. It cannot be open-ended though. You cannot say, buyer broker, compensation shall be whatever the amount the seller is offering to the buyer. You can't do that. So, it's gonna put a lot of situations where, say I'm selling a house, right, and my seller isn't willing to pay a buyer's commission anymore. They say, no, we're not doing that. So, okay, that's fine. Any buyer's agent that has this written agreement that they want their 3%, and my seller isn't willing to do any sort of percentage, okay, now no one wants to come see this home, buyer-wise, because I'm not going to say anyone, because a lot of buyers are going to have to sit and understand that this is a big change, and if you want to work with a buyer's agent, you might have to come up off of some money. That is for sure. Whether it be 1%, 0.5%, 3%, you know. So it's definitely a big, I'm not going to say a big shift, but personally this is one of my favorite things about the settlement. And I think that kind of is a little unpopular opinion, but I'll tell you why. I feel buyer's agents have been unprotected when working with a buyer, because before, if you worked with a buyer as an agent, and let's say you just show this person 500 houses, right? And they finally find that one and they ghost you. They go straight to the seller's agent and they're like, yeah, I really like this house. I would love to put an offer in. And they just cut you all the way out of the deal. That can no longer happen, because now you are in a written agreement that for the amount of work and time that they put into this finding your perfect home for you, they have to get paid, whether it be by you or the seller, or both of you guys come together for a negotiation. So yeah, I think honestly, that is one of the greater things that did come out of the settlement. Now that may be an unpopular opinion, but personally that is one of my favorite things. And it may be harder to, I guess, maybe really sell that, but you're selling things, it's real estate. If you can't sell a buyer agreement, what are we selling here, So yeah. Now I think, don't quote me on this information, it is specifically if you are in the MLS or associated with the National Association of Realtors, right? So let's say I, as a real estate agent, decide to opt out of being a part of the National Association of Realtors, which I do believe you can do. I think this was a conversation we already had in the brokerage. But if you do that, you can't be a part of the MLS, which is the multi-listing service. So you would have to obviously find other ways to market your house where you can go directly to Zillow, I think it's Redfin, all the sites you can list a house, you can go directly to them and list it that way, and you would have to probably find a lot of the old school marketing tactics for marketing a house. But this way, you can tell your buyer, yeah, you don't have to sign an agreement over here. We don't do agreements over here. But that's because you're not a part of who was sued, which is the National Association of Realtors. It would be a lot more complicated to find houses that the buyer couldn't just go find themselves on Zillow, because now you're not a part of the multi-listing service where like FSBOs can enter for a flat fee if they wanted to, off-market, recently expireds where you could just go find this information and things like that. So it's not the end-all be-all for sure. There's definitely, I think, a loophole. So yeah, necessarily don't quote me on that, but I do believe that that is true. If moving forward you choose not to be a part of the National Association of Realtors, you are not in the MLS and you do not have to be in a buyer's agreement, which I think will be, some people are definitely going to do that to try and get more business and make that a big selling point. But me personally, I find it beneficial to have a buyer's agreement, because now you're locked in with this person. So yeah. So according to NAR, one thing that they have always encouraged is that us as agents have always used buyer agreements, because this helps the consumer understand exactly what services they have agreed to and the roles and responsibilities and the amount, which honestly, I love that. Hold on. I can show you guys a buyer's agreement. They're not complicated. This is pretty much what they look like. Pretty simple stuff right here. Purpose of brokerage, buyer's acknowledgement, duration of agreement, okay, let me go ahead and break this down. So pretty much it's talking about that the buyer desires to purchase, lease, or option or exchange of real estate through services of the broker. Broker services may include but not limited to consulting the buyer regarding particular properties and the availability of financing, formulating acquisitions and purchase agreements. So right, then we have the buyer's acknowledgement, where pretty much we're going over buyers represents that the buyer has not signed a written brokerage agreement currently in force with another broker. Buyers not relying on broker to determine the sustainability of any desired property for the broker's purpose of regarding the environmental or other conditions of the property desired, right? It goes into a whole thing. Duration of the contract, it'll probably be about 6 months. That's usually the term of most contracts. Now, because of my brokerage, one thing that we love to promote is that we do day-to-day contracts, right? Especially for listing agreements. So if you were to enter in a listing agreement with me, it's day-to-day, but we do put a 6-month period, but at any time you find that I'm not doing the job that you hired me for, you can cut the contract off immediately. It will probably be the same thing at my brokerage, where it's a 6-month contract for sure, or until I find the house and the house goes through, or it'll probably still be day to day like we do with listing agreements. So if you feel as if I'm not putting in the amount of work and you're not getting your money's worth, you can say, hey, Miss Dallas, I think it's best that we go separate ways because you're just not worth the 3% that I'm going to pay, right? And then it talks about the compensation of the broker in here. Buyer shall pay broker a retainer fee of blank due and payable upon execution of this agreement, right? It has a few different options, A, B, and C. So that was A. B is buyer shall pay the broker at closing an amount equal to number or percentage of the gross selling lease price. Buyer shall receive a credit towards the payment of broker's compensation, right? C, by acceptance of the amount of compensation offered by a listing broker or seller. And then D is other. So, right, you can pretty much write in what you want it to be. And otherwise, unless otherwise specified above, the compensation is due and payable upon closing. It pretty much goes into cost of services or products obtained from outside sources and other things the buyer should know. And then the back is just the Equal Opportunity Act, which is wonderful. Counterparts, copy of agreement, additional provisions if you need it, and then where you sign. So yeah, pretty simple, pretty easy to fill out. Yes, so I felt like that was good to go over since we're sitting here talking about it. So there's also going to be changes where the communication of such things happen between buyers and sellers, the Negotiation Act, if you will. And the offers are no longer allowed on the MLS, which is a big change, right? Because usually it would put like seller is willing to pay 3%, seller is willing to pay 1%, seller is not paying. So it is no longer allowed on the MLS. And one thing I know is it's definitely changed. There's a girl at my brokerage who was paid $1 and she didn't realize it. She didn't pay attention to it, but she was paid $1 for the work that she did. And she got that house sold and made $1. So they're out there doing that. Be careful, right? The seller can still offer compensation. That is not off the table. It is still very much doable. And the seller can still offer the buyer a concession on the cost and the closing costs. Nice to know as a buyer or a seller, right? If you are a buyer or your agent is using an MLS, you will need to sign a written agreement with your agent before touring a home. You can understand exactly what services will be provided and for how much. So yeah, pretty much everything that I said, you know, if you're using the MLS, you're gonna be signing buyer's agreements. Written agreement is required for in-person tours and even a live tour. Like if you want to do a virtual tour right now, we're gonna have to get in that agreement. It's gonna have to happen. But if you go to an open house, like if you go to open houses on Sunday just because you want to see what the market has right now, and you want to stand there and talk to the agent about things, no agreement is required. That's just a simple conversation, nothing too serious. So yeah. The commission is still fully negotiable. So if you have a house that you really like and you're not sure how much the seller is willing to pay, they say, hey, I'll pay 1.5, you do the other 1.5, and that's just not really in your budget. You could still do counter offers and things like that. So that's not fully off the table either. Regardless of what the agreement says, you could still negotiate at the end of the day, because that's also a big part of having a realtor, is having someone who's going to negotiate for you. And it's very important as a buyer going forward, ask questions. Know what services are going to be provided for you. Understand the amount of work that the agent is going to put in for you. understand why they feel that they're entitled to 3% of a house price. For real. Understand that. And I don't mean to sound like entitled or anything, but like, understand that really, because if you feel that your agent is not worth the 3%, find a better agent. For real. That is very serious, because 3% of a house price is not cheap. It is very expensive. So find an agent that is going to be worth that 3%. And a lot of people want to find a deal, or, oh, I know a friend and they're going to give me a great deal on it. That's wonderful, but you're going to get what you pay for. So if you find a friend that's going to do it for you for $50, best believe you're going to get $50 worth of service, compared to if you would have paid full price for not your bestie to do it for you. For real, because you're going to get what you pay for. And when it comes to your living conditions, you should really want to spend the money on the best of the best. That's my advice. Last things I just want to say, where NAR came out and they did say that they never set the standard 6% that is getting paid, 3% for sellers, 3% for buyers. They never set that standard, and they never claim to, which is pretty fascinating if you ask me. So yeah, overall, that's my little TED talk on that. Thank you for coming. What more can I say about that? I think I did a pretty good job at explaining this one. I don't know, something I've had a deep fascination with is the settlement and how it's going to change real estate. And personally, I do believe it's for the better. I think it's going to make us as agents work a little harder, and you're either going to elevate your game as a real estate agent when it comes to the settlement, or you're going to fall off, because it's all about having quality service to people. At the end of the day, treating these people with the kind of respect and care when it comes to their home needs. And it's really about showing, are you worth 3% at this point? And it's gonna be very quickly weeded out if you're not worth 3%, especially when it comes to a buyer now having to pay probably the 3% if the seller's not willing to. So yeah, thank you to anyone that watches, and feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. You know, it's definitely helpful and appreciated, and I hope everyone has a blessed day. Thank you guys so much.
The next morning.
Hi, so don't mind me, it's the next morning. I filmed my video last night, and I'm over here cleaning my house. If you see my shirt, it's a little ugly, that's okay. I am currently on the meeting with my founding broker and the brokerage, and we're just doing our regular Wednesday activities as we do in our meeting, and he touched on a few things as far as in our settlement goes, a few things that I didn't mention, but it didn't come to my attention until today when he mentioned it. So nationwide, there's the settlement that takes place on the 17th. The new changes, August 17th, is going to take place. But a lot of states are doing it on their own. A lot of states have already implemented a lot of changes, such as Florida. Florida's already done a lot of different changes already before the 17th. But Oklahoma is different for sure. The Oklahoma Real Estate Commission isn't going to have all the necessary documents and new contracts available until the 13th of August, which only gives most brokerages 4 days to go over it with their agents and things like that, which I believe is a very short time span. But one thing you definitely have to do is you have to sit there and understand these new contracts and make sure the person signing it definitely understands these contracts. That is very, very big, very key, because that is what this whole lawsuit was about, was people feeling misunderstood, misrepresented, and taken advantage of. So going forward, you definitely have to sit there and make sure everybody understands everything. Like, explain it 5 times if you have to. Stand on the table and yell it if you have to, you know? The next thing is, listing agents will have a bigger advantage in this game now, because say a buyer does not want to sign a buyer's agreement with an agent, but instead they would rather call all the listing agents themselves, set up showings themselves. They can do that one of 2 ways. A non-representation agreement, where between the listing agent and the buyer, they sign this agreement understanding that the buyer is without representation and the listing agent is not representing them. Whatever transpires between the showing and things like that, they understand that they are not being represented by any capacity by this agent, but instead they are simply looking at the property for themselves to see if this could be the match for them. And moving forward, it will definitely be different after that. Like, if the buyer likes the house, then they would probably then get into the buyer's agreement and come together, have a meeting of the minds, and do the negotiation process between the seller and the buyer on how the commission will work. The other thing is, a listing agent will be able to do a buyer's agreement specific to one property. So if I'm a listing agent and I have 123 Main Street and a buyer calls and they want to see it, but they don't want to do the non-representation way, they can do the specific buyer's agreement to this property. But then you have to upfront already talk about commissions once you go under that contract, because as I showed you guys last night, it's in the contract what is to be paid to the agent that you get into this agreement with. So then at that point, you would probably have to already have this conversation with your seller. If I am to get into a buyer's agreement specifically, how would you want that to work commission wise? You know what I'm saying? But at that point, I think every house, every scenario is different. So I can't really speak on what the commission splits would look like, because some agents charge more, some agents charge less. It all just depends. Like I said, you get what you pay for. So yeah. Other than that, I just wanted to say that real quick, and yeah, I feel like that was important knowledge as well. So thank you guys for listening to this.